Alright, welcome back to the video lecture series for Intro to GIS. Today what we're going to talk about is table management and manipulation. If you've been following along with me through the semester, we've already talked a little bit about tables. So for instance, we learned how to create a table in Excel and geocode addresses. We also learned how to plot XY data from a table in ArcGIS. So we've done a few things, but today what we're going to do is go into a little bit more detail, review some of the rules and common mistakes that people will make when working with tables, and we'll also learn how to create a blank empty table in ArcGIS. So to start off here, what we have is a table in ArcGIS. So this is the table view that we might see when dealing with GIS data, and then over here we have a table that might be in Microsoft Excel, which is a common database management software program that most people are probably familiar with. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the definition of a table is. So I want you to remember that tables are one of the three kind of key or main data types in a GIS. So when I talk about the three main types of data that we add into the table of contents, I want you to think about a table, a feature class, and also a raster. And a feature class could be a shapefile or a feature class contained within a geodatabase. So we've got tables, feature classes, and rasters. Now what these tables do is they relate information or data to a geographic object that we might see in the map view in a GIS. So the table is what contains all of the useful or descriptive information, and it's also what we use to symbolize data in a GIS. Now tables are made up of rows and columns. And I want you to think of a row as one geographic object and a column as a field name. So if I scroll up right here, this would be a row, and the locality field would be a column. So state's a column, white adults is a column, white children is a column. Those are also fields or field names. White children would be the field name. And then here we have the row, and the row relates to a feature or also to a geographic object. So earlier I just mentioned a feature class as being a main data type, and I want you to think of feature classes as being collections of features, and features are a row in a table. There are many different file extensions for tables or different types of tables that can be used in a GIS. So I want you to think of the file extension as the piece of descriptive information after a file name that tells us the type of table. Different software programs use different types of tables. So DBF stands for DBase file, and this is kind of the most common file format that we use in a GIS. This is also the table that links the attribute information in shapefiles. So we know that shapefiles are a collection of a bunch of different things. But remember, the DBF is the tabular component to the shapefile. There's also a CSV, which stands for a comma-separated version. There's a text style of table, which are often tab delimited. We also have the .xls or the .xlsx, which are the common Microsoft Excel tables. There's also .mdbs, which is a Microsoft Access file format. It also happens to be the same file extension used for a personal geodatabase. Then there are also SQL and Oracle databases or tables, but these are much more commonly used in the enterprise world where we're managing tabular information at the organizational level. And then lastly, there's also something called info tables, which is a table style that goes back to kind of the beginnings of ArcGIS. So many different tables that we can use or add into ArcGIS, but some of these can only be viewed while others can be edited, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a few slides later. Now, when we talk about the type of data that can be stored in a table. I break it down into numbers, and there are several different types of number fields. So for instance, there could be a short integer, a long integer, a float object, or a double type of data. In most cases, when dealing with numbers, I recommend using the double type. It seems to cause less problems when running different tools and works in many different situations. There's also text types of data. In ArcGIS, this is referred to as a string, but a text is basically any alphanumerical character. So a number 1 could actually be a text type even though it's a number. It just really depends on how you define that field or that column. And remember that in ArcGIS, numbers have no quotes around them, and all text or string fields have single quotes. There can also be fields or columns that hold date information, so time. It could be 12 p.m., but it also could be March 14th, 2014, so it holds time and date information. There's also something called blobs, which stands for a binary large object, which stores information such as symbols, or in CAD there are certain geometries that can be stored. And then there are also identifiers. So you might see in an ArcGIS table there's an FID or a GUID or an object ID, and these are numbers that have, or fields that contain unique identifiers for a row or geographic object that is being stored, most commonly in a geodatabase. Now, something I want to mention about Excel tables is that many people like to edit and manipulate data in Excel, and then they like to add that to ArcMap. This is okay. ArcMap does read Excel spreadsheets, but you need to be careful. For example, you can only have a table opened in one program at a time. Otherwise, they freak out, information disappears, you get funny errors, you get permission problems, it doesn't work. So remember, open up Excel, open a table, do what you need to, close it, and then open it in ArcMap. If you need to go back to Excel, close that table, okay, one at a time. Now, another mistake that people often make is they try to add the whole workbook. You cannot do that. You have to add the individual spreadsheet. Another problem people commonly make is they put spaces in file names or in field names, and this is again a big no-no. So a field name or a file name can never have a space. Use an underscore instead. And then when possible, I want you to avoid using commas, and this is because commas are used in the comma-separated version of a table. So sometimes you get formatting errors and problems arise if you use commas in your data. So if possible, avoid commas. And there are a long list of other characters that are illegal, but we'll go into that in a few minutes. Now, many times people add data into ArcGIS. It comes from Excel and they want to edit it, but they can't. And this is because to edit data in ArcMap, you must save it in the native ArcGIS format. So, for example, if you add an Excel spreadsheet into ArcGIS and you want to edit it, what you'll have to do is export that as a DBase file. And if you remember from a few slides before, a DBase file has the file extension of .dbf. And to export a table, what you do is you open the table, you click on the table properties, and you go down and use the export option. Okay, another very common edit or manipulating tool that we have in ArcGIS is the field calculator. We've already used this in some of our previous labs, but I just want to reiterate or introduce it again. So remember, what the field calculator does is, or the things it does is very similar to expressions in Excel. So we can do math, we can combine fields, we can concatenate fields, and there's a huge long list of different operations or functions that you can see over here that we can do with information stored in different fields. So to get to the field calculator, what you do is you right-click up the column of interest and you go down to field calculator. Now, you need to be careful because these calculations are permanent unless you are in an edit session. If you remember from Lab 5, we learned how to edit data. We also learned how to make entries in an attribute table. So what you need to remember is that if you turn on the editor and you do a field calculation, you can actually undo that, or if you don't save your edits, it does not become permanent. So if you do field calculations outside of an edit session, they're permanent and you can't go back and fix something if you mess up. So the point to remember here is that edit sessions are a good way to protect your data and to only save things that you've kind of done some quality control on. Now, similar to the field calculator is a tool called Calculate Geometry. Again, this can be accessed by right-clicking on the field of interest and going to Calculate Geometry. Now, this tool is nice because it quickly computes area for polygons, perimeters of polygons, or the XY coordinate of a geographic object. So it's really nice if you're trying to extract some geographic information. Now, one thing you need to be aware of is that this tool only works on data that's in a projected coordinate system. So many times you might run into situations where you try to do calculate geometry, everything's grayed out, it doesn't work, and that's likely because you're in a geographic coordinate system such as WGS 84. Again, this is very similar to the field calculator, and you can run this within an edit session. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this edit session. Anytime you want to edit data or type in new information into a table, it really requires that you run an edit session, unless somehow you use Calculate Geometry or Field Calculator. So remember, to start an edit session, you right-click in the toolbar area, you check the Editor tool. Then you start the editor, you open the table, then you click in a specific cell of interest, then you type in your information. You do want to be careful that you're typing in the right information based on the property of the field. So if you have a number field, you obviously can't type in somebody's name. It won't work. Remember that these edits are not permanent unless you save your edits. So be very careful about saving edits as you move along. And remember, you can still use the field calculator. If you mess up, you can undo it as long as you haven't saved that information. Okay. Now, one thing that people often run into, or a problem, is that while they're editing a table in an edit session, they want to go in and add a field. And, well, when they go to the table properties, add field is grayed out. That's because you cannot add new fields in an edit session. So to add a field, you must turn off the editor, go to table properties, click add field, type in your field name. Remember, don't use any spaces, and be very careful about the type of field that you set it to. So double check it. If you want it to be a string field, set it to string field, number field. Double is the best one to use, but just remember to go slow and to look at all of the options when you create new fields. Another very common thing that we've already done is joining tables or using relates. So this is done when we try to link two tables together based on a field of common interest. So joining is something that you do very frequently in a GIS, and it's just something that I wanted to remind you of. So that, remember, linking two tables together based on a common field. Here's just an example of the join dialog box here, where we go in and we pick, we want to join attributes from a table. We pick a table of interest, which would be the one that we right click on. We identify the field that we want to link together. Then we pick the other table that we want to link to, and we pick the matching field from that table. It's always a good idea to validate your join before hitting OK, but it's a pretty simple process that we'll do in a few more labs later on in the semester. Okay, another very useful tool is the summarize tool. So sometimes you have a field and you want to summarize the information on that, and what you do is you right click on that column of interest, and you can click summarize, or you can also click and use an option called get statistics. So what the summarize option does is it produces a new table for you that summarizes data based on some other field. So here maybe we've used the summarize tool to summarize information based on state name. So what this has done is it's created a new table with a new row where it's given us a count and the average values for everything in the other table that was from the state of Oklahoma, right? Now, similar to the summarize tool, there's also a get statistics tool. Same thing, you right click on the column of interest, go to statistics, and what this gives you is a frequency distribution related to whatever column that was that you right clicked on. So again, a very nice way to get some descriptive information or descriptive statistics relating to a field of interest. Okay, so some common problems that we run into on tables is that field names have an invalid character. They might start with an invalid character, they might contain an invalid character, or they're using some sort of reserved word. Some things that you want to never use or invalid starting characters include all of these here. So basically the rule is to never start a field using a symbol or a number. As long as you do that, you'll be okay. And then generally speaking, all symbols are not allowed as characters within a field name. So what do you take from this slide? Don't use symbols or numbers when naming field names, and symbols do not work as entries in a table at all. Okay, so that's the end of that short PowerPoint. Now what I want to do is jump into ArcGIS so that I can show you guys how to make a table from scratch, which is something that most people do in Excel, but I think it's important for you to know how to do this within ArcGIS Desktop as well. In my opinion, it's the best practice to create tables and manipulate them within ArcGIS. So what we'll do is we'll go to our catalog, and I inserted a new data frame so that I can add some fresh information to this map. And I'm going to go in and I'm just going to create a new field in my, or a new folder in my documents called table exercise, and that's where I'll put my information. So I'll go in here, and what we're going to use is that magic click, that right click. That's how we create almost everything in our catalog. It's also how we access a lot of properties. So I'm going to go down here, I'm going to go to New, and I'm going to create a new DBase table. Remember, the DBase table is the native ArcGIS table format. It's also the table that's linked to shapefiles, and its file extension is .dbf. So what that's done is it's created a new table, and it's dropped it into my data frame automatically. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we're going to open this table, and we'll see that there's nothing really in there. There's an object ID, which is this unique identifier, and very generically it's created field 1. So maybe we're going to create a table for some information that we've collected out in the field. In this particular situation, we've been collecting, we've been out field sampling for bees, and so we have bee traps out in the field, and we're trying to collect information on the number of bees that we've caught in each trap, the geographic location of that trap, and also the number of species. So what we'll go in here and we'll do is we'll start creating a few new fields, which are also columns, and then we'll add some entries, which would be rows or features. So I'll click the drop down button and hit add field, and I'm going to call this site name. Notice how I don't use any spaces. I'm going to make that a text field, and 50 characters long is fine. I'm going to create another one called X for the X location, and we'll make that a double. We'll also create one for the Y so that we can record latitude and longitude. Make that a double. And we'll add another field called species number for the number of species that we caught in the traps. I'm going to also make that a double. I'm going to add another field called total count for the total number of bees caught. Make that a double. And then we might want to also record some notes. So I'll add another field called notes, and I'm going to make this a string or a text type, and we might have a lot of notes that we want to write down, so I'll make that 250 characters long. So what I've done here is I've added a bunch of columns or fields, but we have no actual information in here. So what we need to do to actually put info in the table is we need to start an edit session so that we can enter information. So this object ID we won't put any information in there. We're going to disregard field 1. We'll get rid of that later, and we'll click on site name. And so I might call this site 1, a very generic name. I might have had the X and the Y locations recorded on a GPS that I might kind of transfer over. So I might put in here for the X, we'll go with let's see, negative 81.22 for the longitude value, and for the Y we might put in 37.14 for the latitude value. Now in this site 1 we might have had 4 species in the trap, but the total number of bees was 15, and then maybe something happened at that site, so I'll put a note saying that the trap was knocked over or tampered with. Right? Very easy. Okay, great. So now I can scroll back here, and I can go to my my second row, which would be my second feature. So I might go in here and type in site 2. Again, I would put in the latitude and longitude, so this one might be negative 81.33 and 37.19, and in this one there were 7 species and maybe 52 total, and I have no notes for this particular entry. Okay, great. So now I want to save these. I would go to the editor and I would hit Save Edits. And if I wanted to stop my edit session, I would hit Stop Editing. And maybe this field I don't need, so I could right-click on it, and I could turn this field off, and it goes away. And now I have a nice table that I can use to plot XY data, symbolize site locations based on species number or total count, and do a lot of other things. And so I prefer doing all table management in ArcGIS, but we know that Excel is an option. I just wanted to show you that you can build tables from scratch in ArcGIS. That's all for today's short table lecture. Please join us again tomorrow for a new lesson. Thanks. Bye.